You know, they call you an asshole.
Been called a bitch 1,000 times.
A knocked up whore. Get the F out of his effing room, you effing N-word. I've been bitten, choked, punched in the mouth. I had a guy try to kick me in my stomach while I was pregnant.
You push me past my limit, past my capacity of being able to multitask. Something's gonna get missed. And when I say something, I'm talking about your mother. I'm talking about your father. I'm talking about your husband and your wife.
They may be at breaking point, but their bosses have warned them not to speak out. They are anyway.
So we're breaking news at 6 as thousands of Providence doctors, nurses, and other workers walk off the job. It is a large...
From policymakers to frontline practitioners, we dive deep into the diverse worlds that make up our evolving medical landscape. Join us as we uncover success stories. Whether you're a seasoned professional or simply curious about the future of health, this is your gateway to the uncharted territories of modern medicine. Anas Abidrabu is your host of Uncharted Narratives podcast, Sirdiyat. Welcome to Uncharted Narratives. Today, we're diving into the world of Darlene Schindel, a powerhouse nurse, leadership coach, and catalyst for change in healthcare. She's a visionary who has dedicated her career to transforming healthcare from the inside out. With over 2 decades of experience as a neuroscience nurse, Darlene empowers nurses to rediscover their passion and purpose. As a transformational leadership coach, Darlene believes that every nurse has the potential to be a change maker. Her unique approach focuses on nurturing the whole person, body, mind, heart, and spirit. She helps nurses move from burnout and uncertainty to becoming confident, inspired healthcare professionals who can truly make a difference. Get ready for an inspiring conversation that will challenge everything you thought you knew about nursing, leadership, and personal transformation.
Okay. Darlene, I am happy having you here with us today. It's my pleasure. I want to just give a brief intro about me and you, Darlene. Darlene, she is one of a few leader nurses in Canada who take care for me since I came to Canada. And she tried to connect me with all successful nurses and leaders in the healthcare sector from academia and from the hospital. And every time make sure I am engaged, and she tried to take me step by step and never ever felt I am alone when I have Darlene. Before I have Darlene, I felt I am alone, isolated in Canada. But after that, Darlene, she is amazing. So when I start this podcast, I go for her. I told her, listen, you have no option. You are with me. You are in your name in the list. And she, thankfully, now with us today. So Darlene, you are most welcome.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be here today. And thank you so much for having me. So interestingly, you wanted to, so people know a little bit about me. I never wanted to be a nurse. I wasn't a little girl who grew up in Canada and said, oh, I want to be a nurse. That do. Never even crossed my, and yes, my sisters and I, we played with dolls and did all kinds of things. But I never wanted to be a nurse. I was an athlete and I played the violin and I did other things. And then in high school, when it was time to, what's next in your life, my parents would always say, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? It used to drive me crazy. But anyways, at the end of high school, I got a job, like many young women out of high school. I got a job as a healthcare aide in a brand new continuing care center that was built in our area. And I met this amazing young nurse. She was my charge nurse, and she was a psychiatric nurse. And what amazed me about her and how she helped us look after our patients, she included us in their care. She talked to us. She let us make rounds with the physicians. She informed us about when we were giving new medications to people, how it might affect their care, and be careful because he's on this new drug and he might be dizzy. So be careful when you're in the shower and all these things. And I just thought, this is so amazing, this caring for other human beings. And I met the families and all these things. And I was just so impressed. And every day we would have rounds, we would have end of the shift conversations. And I said to her, I really like this. I said, do you think I could be a nurse? And she goes, oh, Darlene, you could be a nurse. And so that started my journey into nursing. And I've been everywhere in my nursing career. My background is in neurosciences, and I've been from the bedside to the boardroom table. And yeah, and then and
We
I
will go through that. There is a lot of a transition in your career
yeah
and a lot of good
yeah
story. But I want to thank that charge nurse who encouraged you to be a nurse because she makes someone like her, and you are taking care for me and a lot of young professionals like us. I like young. I consider myself still young, and I hope when I become senior, we be more productive and more successful and look pretty like you in the future.
well something. And one day I had an amazing job, and the next day I didn't. And that happens to a lot of nurses. It's not what happens to us; it's how we respond to what happens. So for me, what happened to me at that time was that I thought, okay, well, what can I do now? And that losing that job actually meant that I had a big transition into healthcare, into coaching. And so when I was like, well, who am I there to, what kind of work do I want to do? I really cared about frontline nurses. That's who I wanted to coach. And it's progressed since then. I really felt that frontline nurses needed the support.
We will touch base with the coaching for the front line and mentoring because there is a lot of debate there. And for sure, I want to utilize this and learn from your experience. But before we get there, let's take it the concept which you bring it on the table, and I like it. Fixing broken brain and bodies. So what that mean?
Okay. Well, so in my career, I was always in the acute care. I worked in the neuro ICU, and everything that we were doing, and it's helpful for us to understand how our system works. So the hospital, which people often think that is the center of healthcare, but that's acute care. That's where everybody goes when they're really ill. And so that's what we've been focused on, fixing broken brains and bodies. And that's what I felt I was doing in all that time in neurosurgery. And yes, we did amazing things and saved lives and helped people through the end of their life. But we need to recognize now in this day and age, we need to move upstream to building better brains and bodies. We need to address our nutrition, our social emotional health, all of those things, right from birth to death. We need to focus there. Because right now, we don't have a healthcare system. We have an illness system, and we need to change that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you and echo what you are saying. And yeah, we need to see the holistic approach, how all those team and stakeholder, they are connected, and to provide a healthcare system, which a care system is not illness, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So when you start, you tell us, and this was first time I know that, you were not think in the past to be a nurse, but you become a successful nurse, and after that you moved from nursing and starting or start to be out of the traditional work as a nurse and bedside nurse. Is this because you don't like or you don't want to be a nurse, then you fix that later on, or this is a normal progress and growth in your career?
Because I recognized that leadership needed a huge boost in the nursing profession. And that was what I felt, a strength that I felt I could bring. So leadership is important, and leadership for every single nurse. One of the things that I do when I'm working with people is lead where you stand. You don't have to be the director of nursing or anything like that. Where you are every day in your job, you're the leader. You're leading yourself and the people that you're caring for. How we look at leadership and understanding that that's every nurse's responsibility, and how they can do it simply. It's not just about having the nursing skill, but understanding that every patient that you care for, you're the leader there. And it is, yes, we work with every other healthcare professional, and that's very important. But it's generally the nurses that are there 24/7 in the end with the patients. And so we have a huge responsibility in our profession to be that leader right where we stand.
So I like that. And my opinion from this, and we have been discussed this in the past. So just to take it here further and make it public. So I would like to, again, I know your opinion on this discussion, but let's share it with our audience. So unfortunately, the culture and the system somehow, we have that concept, it's not my own business. Even if he or she don't have that title as a leadership, try to go beyond the issue or the obstacle they have and try to make a change. They stuck with the system and the resistance. And every time they found very hard to make any change, then they give up. So how I can make a change and take my leadership skills regardless my title, and I found a huge resistance in the system.
Well, this is you've really nailed it. This is a huge problem. So yes, we can train and develop and coach nurses and help them to be their best, and that is a lot, of what my practice in coaching with frontline nurses. But what you're talking about now is the reality of the systems problems that we're dealing with. And so for me now, it's not just helping the nurses at the bedside, but we need to also fix the system. And what's not happening right now, and we see this all over, and I think the pandemic has just exposed that even more, about nurses feel like they're not being heard. They're not being able to say what's going on. If you look at any healthcare organization or structure, they're at the front line. And I think we misunderstand what the role of management is. So I had this conversation a number of years ago with a top line nurse director who asked me, okay, Darlene, what would you do? What would you do in my situation? Well, I didn't tell her what I would do if I were her. I was just saying the role here is that you want to be empowering. You want to make sure that your frontline leaders are listening to their staff, that they know what's going on, and their job is to move the conversation upward, not this top-down situation which we're dealing with. The mandate comes up here, all the changes come from up here, this is what we're going to do, when the people up here aren't even aware of what's the struggle down here. And so that's kind of, in many areas, this is the challenge that we have right now. There's a disconnection between what's happening here and those nurses aren't being heard. And that's what's leading us to burnout, overwhelm. I don't care. I'm out of here. I don't want to be a nurse anymore. And the frontline nurse I had a conversation with and said, what is the number one problem that we're dealing with in nursing? And he got it. He said, the frontline leaders don't have the support and the skill that they need to lead in this day and age. And so I said, that's right. And so that's why now my work not only is with frontline staff to help them individually, but we also need to fix the system. That needs to happen. And it doesn't take a lot, but you have to have, the organization you work in has to believe in it. They have to buy into it. They have to be supportive of it. And great things can happen.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So one of the things you mentioned, I like it. We have illness system, not healthcare system. So based on your leadership and your experience, share with me when this moment came for you to came with this concept. You understand our system is broken and we have illness. If you can share any moment.
Well, nutrition, students, teachers, exercising with parents. And I heard her on the radio one day. And so I called her up and I said, you know what? I said, I wanted to understand what she was doing. So we met, she talked about it. I said, you know what? You're doing the same thing in healthcare that in teaching that we're doing in healthcare. We should work together. So that's when we got together. And the whole idea of NSTEP is about nutrition, teachers, exercising, and working with parents on how can we stay healthy. And she invited me then to be the health champion here in Edmonton. And again, it was working in schools and helping teachers to understand within the curriculum that they were teaching how they could introduce nutrition information, how they could teach, physical activity, why that was so important. And for me as a neuroscience nurse, I thought that's amazing. And what I love teaching the most is teaching junior high about their amazing teen brain and what's happening to your brain and why, you have such an amazing brain when you're a teenager. But again, at that time, people didn't even realize, our brain isn't fully developed until we're 25, not when we're 15. So there's lots of potential. But the whole idea is that, again, we need to focus on keeping kids healthy. And we see that now too. We've had a lot of mental health challenges for young people, well, across our whole age range. And so we do need to focus there. We know that the rate of cancer is going to increase. Our chronic diseases like obesity, diabetes, all these things, we need to address them. But we don't want to address them here in an acute care setting. We need to be in the community. We need to be in primary care. And nurses are front and center there.
Amazing. So you play a vital role in your leadership with the healthcare system, but later on you move to coaching. So what is motivate you to leave your role and the success you are doing there and move to start to coaching the front line? So what is your motivation?
Well, I think it's like a missing piece. It's like a missing piece, right? So I didn't see it. Like there isn't enough time. Again, that was the system's frontline nurse. I mean, I loved that job that I had in my first nursing role. During my master's work that I did, I interviewed a number of key nurse leaders in our province. And my question was to them, how did they decide on their position, whether you were the dean of nursing or the head of the organization or in a top leadership role? How did you decide to get there? Like, what was your plan? Like, did you start out saying, oh, I want to be the dean at, the University of Alberta or the University of Calgary? What are people's leadership journeys? And it's interesting because it's not like people start out there wanting to go there. It's part of their journey. And how did they get there? And what are they seeing the issues? So for me, I could see how coaching people would be an additional tool that they weren't getting anywhere else. And to increase their knowledge, their skill, their faith in themselves. And really, when I'm working with nurses who are really struggling, it's because, again, do you know, what are your values? What are your values? We want to have joy in nursing. When I've done some work with IHI, they did a great program on, people want to have more joy. Want to have, for me, helping a nurse to have work-life harmony is what it's all about. It's all about, if you have joy, you should bring that to your work. But in the setting that we have now, where nurses aren't being listened to, it's impossible. They go home, they don't care anymore. And you've probably got stories like that you've seen at the bedside in the hospitals where there's struggle and nurses are saying, I'm out of here because they just can't cope anymore. But we can address that.
I did it very quickly after 3 years. I left my career because the burnout, the responsibility, also feeling you are not empowered. And I believe when the patient need me, I need to give them that high quality, but I cannot give them high quality because for the shortage. So I was exhausted. So the easiest thing for me was to quit. And I share my experience. So here, Darlene, one of the things now we keep hearing a confusion and mismatch and misunderstanding for who is the coaching and mentoring. I will try to share some of the myth where I keep hearing from them, and every time they challenge me as a coach. So anyone can be a coach. Coach not required to be educated. There is no regulatory body for the coaching, and the leadership in the hospital, they don't believe in any investment in that. When you hear such like this myth or a story around coaching and mentoring and the misuse of a term of coaching, and they started to take it as a salad wherever they want, they start to mention coach. What is your impression about what we're hearing right now in the healthcare sector?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question because, and again, so I think it behooves anybody who's going to work with a coach to find out what is your certification? Because I mean, I studied coaching. It was like I say, it was like doing another master's degree. And so, if you're going to a weekend course and they're saying you can coach after that, that isn't the same as when you learn. There's so much behind, but you don't have all the skills required to be a certified coach. So I think that if you're looking to work with a coach, make sure that you investigate and find out what their certification is and, and things. I think it's a very important step. And interestingly enough, when I first became a coach, I had an executive, a healthcare executive, a high up executive ask me, "So, Darlene, what are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, I'm a certified coach," and I was told, "Oh, just call HR and you can be an executive coach." But what that person didn't realize is that what I really cared about was frontline. That's what I cared about. Honestly, now as we've been going through all these issues with systems, I do realize that I have to do both, because you can't just do the frontline staff. Though the nurse executives, the nurse leaders in a formal leadership role, right from first level and all the way up, they need support too. They need new skills. They need support. They aren't being listened to. It's not, the system problem is weighing on them as well. So both of those areas need, if you're working with a nurse in a leadership position, they're just distressed.
Yeah, and I believe also one of the good point you touch base with it, the leadership or the formal leadership, also they need to see the value of the coaching, because if they don't believe in the coaching, they will not support their staff. And one of the things you started when you mentioned the coaching, what is your value? So what is your core value? We start as a human before as a start as a career and professional development, but it's something we need to distinguish between those. If I know what is my value, so I will connect my profession with my value and I will feel the joy. But as experience with me, I came across a lot of frontline nurses. They are happy, they are convinced, they see the value of the coaching, but when they want to start, they cannot afford that amount of investment. They want, but they cannot. And their hospital, they do not consider this as a part of professional development, because still they believe it's a course and classroom. So from your perspective and from your experience, how we can overcome such a challenge?
Yeah, it's interesting because for during National International Nurses Week, I often get the opportunity to do some support for nurses, and it's invaluable. And I remember being at an acute care hospital one year, and they invited me to come and do several lunch and learns, like at lunchtime when nurses were on the unit, they were at work and they could gather. And for a 3-month program, because they don't get covered by their union. And so I've spoken to them about, you should approach your union, tell them what you want. If you understand the value that this is going to help you with. So rather than, and what ends up happening is they do nothing rather than going and asking for, could you add this to the list? And I've spoken to union leaders who have said, no, we negotiate the very best we can for the nurses. And so, so unless the unions or the nurses are saying, this is really helpful, I would like support here, I'm not sure if that's going to change. And then, of course, you're right. Then the onus is on the nurse to pay out of their pocket.
I believe, and this is the counseling and a social worker. I came to know about them very newly. Recently, I wasn't aware about them. I met a lady. She is in British Columbia, and she told me about she working with this counseling. And the number of doctor and physicians and different healthcare professionals that they are visiting here. But again, it's more into therapists. So I have something clear. I want to fix it, and I want therapy. But sometimes I am okay. I am okay. I have no issue. I don't have a psychological issue, but I want a coach to help me structure my thoughts and build my future. So this is something is not there. And I believe more work needed from different stakeholders. And as you mentioned, also nurses, they need to speak up to get that benefit. But however, counseling itself is not common. Even it's covered by the union, but not everyone knows is this kind of service is available there. Okay.
You
If
know,
you
it's
allow me,
interesting because when, from the nurses that I've coached, um, um, I always say, like, I'm just holding you. I'm holding you in a cocoon, and you're doing the work. You actually do the work as we go forward. But and she said to me, that, and in her testimonial, she, because Darlene is a nurse, when we talk about things, I don't need to explain things to her. She's had the experience. She knows what I'm talking about. She can just relate already. So we're already on the same page to begin with. I don't need to tell my story. And then if I'm explaining something about, being in acute care or where I work, she already understands. She's been there, right? She knows. So we can move forward from there. So that's the other value of having a nurse who's coaching in her own profession.
because you've been in the same situation like her, and you understand her role, and also that feeling she tried to share with you. You've been there, so this is the one of the values. So
Let me
you
give you an example. So when I was a brand new nurse, and I made the choice that I wanted to work on neurosurgery. So when I started working there, and I was always one of these people would say, well, if that's not working, well, how can we do it better? Why don't we do it different? And so the group of nurses that became some of my very best, they put up with me. They would say, oh, yeah, well, this is why. Or, oh, Darlene, don't worry about that. We'll do it. But they acknowledged me that I had a question, or that I was challenging something, or that I'd be willing to look at things differently. But again, nowadays, nurses don't even have the capacity. It's like you had explained earlier, you just didn't have the time to do all this and that. You were barely hanging on. There wasn't enough nursing staff to look after things. And that's exactly where we are now. And that's exactly the story that we hear from so many nurses. They don't have the capacity to even you spend time with brand new nurses that are coming into their career. And so they get a disillusioned very fast. I'm doing some work with internationally educated nurses, and same thing. You need to have someone who has the ability to mentor them and support them along the way. And in the grassroots system, nurses don't have the capacity. There's not enough of them there, and things aren't being done in the way that they have the time or to be able to work with those people together. So we have an issue.
we have big issue, and the numbers. I maybe I discussed this with you or not, but the numbers is now based on the Canadian Federation institution. It's giving us 40% from Gen Z. They are leaving nursing in Canada after first year. So we are losing nursing faster than we supply our workforce. And in other statistic, it's not related for nursing. 70% of Gen Z, they don't want to take a managerial level. They don't want to take any responsibility or leadership. So we have a big systematic issue, and we need to think about it. And who will pay the cost? Even if we don't have that fund, however, we need to utilize that fund, because the working with the patient never been in traditional work. So how look like the burnout? Is this something just you are blaming? You don't want to work night shift, and you don't want to work long shift hour, or what?
Part of it has to do with the fact that nurses don't feel like they're valued. So if I'm working whatever, let's say I'm working in a acute care hospital, and if I say, we need more staff because we're getting much sicker patients out of the ICU unit and all that stuff. So, when we talk about things like nurse-patient ratios and stuff, well, that's not something those kinds of things. So it takes more time, and it takes more you need to be paying attention to the family that you're looking after, to the patient. And that's what nurses are struggling with. They don't have that time to take that time to do the care. So new nurses are struggling. So they come in. So if I'm graduate, I work with a lot of nursing students in our post-secondary. And so again, it's knowing what is it that you want to do. So finding an area of work that you love to do, but then also you have to take care of yourself. But then again, they want to have that connection on the unit. And if all they see is nurses who don't want to mentor them because they don't have time, a new nurse comes onto the unit and you say, oh, great, we have some help. And she needs help doing things, but you say, just go and do your job. But she needs some mentoring and she needs some help here, and she needs to get into being the best nurse she can be. And that's often what's lacking now. We don't have that capacity for the nurses that are there at the bedside to be able to do that. And I'm only sharing things that I'm hearing. So if things are different, again, please contact me. Let me know if your story is different, because this is exactly the thing that we need to raise the issue of. So whether it's an international nurse that's new and trying to figure out the system and wants to work so badly, wants to use their nursing skills. And same thing with new nurses, but we have to include them. We need to have the time to nurture them along the way. They learn certain things in nursing school, but the application happens when you're on the job. So it's not like, you're going to, I often see this post that nurses have written, I wish I would have learned this in nursing school. Okay, yes, there's so much that in nursing school you get taught at university, but everything once you graduate is life experience, is the real world, is what's facing you. And so again, we need to have that, graduating, from nursing school, from nursing program is just the beginning. You've got the foundation, but now the real world happens. And now we need to continue to nurture and support that nurse in every way that we can. And that's what a lot of, I think, is missing in the system right now, is that those nurses don't have that support. They don't have that mentorship, because the nurses that are on the unit do not have the time or the capacity to do that.
Yeah, it is a real challenge. And especially, I came to know from my friend, he is a professor in a nursing faculty. He informed me after the pandemic, also the amount of practical training of the nursing has been decreased to prevent any infection. So in the past, it was limited. Now we decrease that. So now the nurses, they go for the market, or they go for the real experience with less practice, which make them not confident enough to treat the patient. With the shortage in the hospital, so they cannot take proper shadowing from senior nurses to help them to take that. And now with the huge technology, all of those is not in the curriculum. So they need to go and see all those technology to use them and to live very quick. So from first day, there is a huge challenge on them and pressure to understand how to deal with the patient. And one thing here, I want to share it with in interview with Mel Cortez, and she brings something very interesting about the amount of the threat and violence the frontline they had from the patient and companion, and they are not supportive from their leadership, and they are not trained how to deal with as a threat. So now she started her own business to focus more about how to engage physical safety with the patient safety to deliver high quality for the patient. So again, and I put this is in the intro, so just to let, if anyone is not as a frontline, to understand amount of abuse and threat on daily basis the nurse is might. So this is the burnout. If you come on the office, if you go, let's assume you are in the office, you are not a nurse, you don't have life caring take for the life, but you go for the office, your manager doesn't appreciate you, all your colleagues, they are shouting in you, and whatever you do is not enough, and you work day and night and long hours, and also your financial compensation is not enough. How do you feel?
Exactly. So you've just listed them all off, and so that some of these reasons are why especially new nurses. I mean, they don't necessarily come into a job thinking, like, oh, I want to be, like I said, the director of nursing. They come into the job because they care. They feel this is something that they can do. And so remember what happens in that hospital. That's an illness care. Remember, I told you, we were talking about that in the beginning. if you look around our society, there's a lot more violence. There's a lot more car accidents. There's a lot more mental health challenge, mental illness and addictions and all these challenges that we have. And people are struggling with, just to get through life. And so there's so much stress and cortisol going around in for everybody. And so that's the kind of patients that end up, if they end up in the hospital, again, that's a much higher acuity of a patient than if you have someone who comes in and they're coming because they have a appendicitis attack or something like that. So the acuity of the patients that we're seeing is definitely much higher. So it requires a lot more emotional support from the nurse. And again, so and oftentimes it's like, one of the things that I always like to teach nurses is how to take care of themselves when they're on the unit. So when you're going into the room and you have a stressful, difficult patient to manage, is just to do some breathing before you go. So put your hand on the door, on the doorknob, and nurses don't often take the time to do that. Just to breathe, just to relax so that they go in and they can actually care for their patient, not having that high cortisol level and just being in a state of stress all the time. And you know what? It happens to not only there, but also in primary care, in doctors' offices and things. And a lot of that has to do with.
We've covered some incredible ground today, but our conversation is far from over. In our next episode, we'll dive deeper and explore even more fascinating insights. Stay tuned for part 2 of our conversation on uncharted narratives. If this episode sparked something in you, here's how you can keep our mission alive. Subscribe to Uncharted Narratives Surdiyat. Leave us a 5-star review. It helps more amazing people discover our stories. Share an episode that moved you with a colleague or friend. Connect with me on LinkedIn and join our healthcare innovation community. Together, we're not just telling stories. Until next time, stay curious, stay passionate, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in healthcare. See you in the next episode of Uncharted Narratives Surdiyat.